Welcome everyone to the Price Formation Enhancements Working Group Series, Session 13, Sprint number 3 for our meeting today. We would like to welcome you on behalf of the California ISO. My name is Brenda Corona. I'll be helping out, facilitate, and scribe as a scribe for this mock call. Today we have a wonderful policy developer who helped step in, CV Spiewak. She will be here today. She is on video here today to help out with this session. And along with Juan, who will also be helping as our facilitator. For today's call, we have a few housekeeping reminders. So this call is being recorded and will be posted for informational community purposes only. Any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. As these collaborative working groups continue, we encourage open dialogue and we allow other verbal and written comments. So feel free to send them over to myself. My event producer is Ryan for any technical issues. Today, we want to announce that we are allowing the Call Me feature that's allowed on the Teller platform. We worked with that vendor and like we were able to integrate it back to how it was prior months. So that feature is allowed. So we are going to be monitoring the Call Me feature to make sure it works well for our meetings. We did have a few issues, but we're positive that it's going to work out great like it used to. So feel free to use the Call Me feature with your phone device as well, and don't use the double login to join. Instructions to using the WebEx is that you use the raise hand icon that's low on the lower toolbar to ask a verbal question. When asking, please state your full name and affiliation so we know who's speaking. If those who submit questions through the chat, please also add on your organization name so we can know who is asking the question, and we can definitely answer those during the call. And so when you do raise your hand and ask a question, please be sure do not mute yourself because it will lock that functionality and not let you follow up with our subject matter experts and policy developer here today. So make sure you're able to keep your hand up and we'll lower it when you're done. Today's agenda, we will kick things off with Juan with today's goals and also highlight next sessions. And then he'll pass it on to CV, who'll go through the Sprint 3 scarcity pricing problem statements. And then Juan will help out with the discussion involving scarcity pricing. I'll go over briefly on the next steps. We do have a few updates for our upcoming meetings in February. We are going virtual for today's meeting as well. So we'll keep an eye out for any other possible in-person meetings, but this time we are virtual to follow along with the Sacramento COVID guidelines. And at this time, I'll go ahead and introduce Juan, and also CV, who's here today. We thank you so much, and I'll go ahead and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Brenda. And again, just to reiterate, I mean, very excited to have the Call Me feature. I know it's just a quality of life thing, but it goes a long way. And leave that hand up, right? We're looking for that engaging discussion through these working groups. So thank you for reminding us of that, Brenda. So for today's session, excuse me, we're going to review 3 potential problem statements. I hope everybody had a chance to go to our initiative page, take a look at the presentation, and kind of begin digesting these so we can have that robust discussion here today. And now these are in our Sylvia will kind of go over what we've covered, but these are much less around you know, the left of the line or right of the line conversations we've been having earlier in the sprint. These are a reflection of kind of a cross-section of the stakeholder discussion to date, dating all the way back to the initial Price Formation Enhancements working group conversation. And we're going to be focusing on the actions that are being taken to resolve shortages and how those actions have an impact on pricing. So that is kind of the theme, so to speak, of today and what we're really wanting to try to dive into. So we're going to have a stakeholder discussion on these problem statements. Sylvia has a wonderful presentation for us to kind of frame this. And if you have any questions, again, feel free in that moment, raise your hand. Let's have that back and forth dialogue. But we're really looking to seek the opportunities that may be presented in the discussion of these potential problem statements that we're putting out. We'd like to identify other opportunities, how we can improve price formation rules to kind of capture or reflect some of these actions being taken to resolve shortages. And then we're always open to receiving either, ideas on solutions or any necessary considerations that we need to have in order to begin developing those solutions if we have kind of crystallization in the stakeholder community that this is in fact a good problem statement that we want to move forward with. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. This is just to kind of show where we are. Again, this is a graphic that I'm sure all of you have seen many, many times. This is the main reason why we call these potential problem statements. We want your feedback because we are here to really have the conversation of the working group, then inform what we're solving here within the policy effort at the California ISO. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide. And with that, I'm going to hand this off to Sylvie. Sylvie, take it away.
Thank you, Juan. Hi, everyone. My name is Sylvie Spiewak. I am a senior policy developer here at the California ISO. Taking over for James today for this final leg of the sprint. We've got sort of a grab bag of problem statements that reflect a sort of cross-section of stakeholder discussions remaining from the previous two scarcity pricing sprints that we've had so far this January. Go to the next slide. So in week one, we discussed the market's response to actual shortages. Sprint number two, we discussed actions that the market should take before a shortage occurs and discussed how prices should rise before that shortage occurs. And this week, we will discuss how actions being taken to resolve shortages might impact market prices. In the last working group, I heard a stakeholder use the phrase, bring rationality to prices. I really appreciated that turn of phrase, and it feels to me like the overall theme of today's discussion. So I'll have 3 problem statements for you that focus on actions being taken to resolve shortages, how they might impact prices, but these are really intended to serve as models or a jumping off point for discussion for you, the stakeholder community, to help us identify what specific opportunities exist to help improve how price formation can more fully capture and reflect the impact of these actions on market prices. So let's dive right in. We'll go to the next slide. Problem statement 1. The impact on market prices from reliability use limited resources and non-market actions during emergency events is not holistically captured by price formation. Notice I don't identify a specific action here, but we can go through a few examples. Next slide. This is my preliminary list of potential examples for us to consider. It's by no means exhaustive, but I like all of these examples for particular reasons. So first, there's a category I've called economic participation is reliability use limited. This might be supply resources like strategic reserves reliability program or reliability demand response resources. These resources are allowed to participate economically, meaning they submit a bid with a price attached to it. But dispatch is also dependent on reliability-related conditions. For example, RDRR may participate in the market during an EEA watch. That's up to the discretion of market operators and really depends on the nature of the underlying emergency condition. The second category is no economic participation. These costs are defined out of market. So again, these are triggered by reliability events, but they are just triggered by system reliability and not by price. Some of these programs show up as a reduction in load. Some show up as resources, but they're not priced. So they don't have an impact on the market price via economic dispatch or penalty prices. And the final category is no defined cost. So for instance, Flex Alert, when the ISO puts out a notification asking for voluntary conservation, or when we arm load or do manual load shedding, these appear as a reduction in load and don't have a direct price impact. Take a pause, see if anyone has opinions about these so far. No? All right.
Okay. If you have any questions, again, #2 if you're on that dial-in. But Sylvie, I'm not seeing any hands. Well, nope. Alva, let's go ahead and go to Alva. There we are.
Caller, your line's unmuted.
Hi, Alva.
Hi. This is great. I like the typology, and I'm just wanted to get more clarity on what you mean when you say not fully captured by price formation. Maybe you could explain what that means to you in this context.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there. For example, in this first category, economic participation is reliability use limited. I noted that these resources do submit an economic bid. I think that there is some discussion around what that economic bid means, if it's a marginal cost of that resource, if it's determined by another entity, for instance, Department of Water Resources sets the price for some of these strategic reserve resources. And we have other types of regulations in the market to control the price. So for example, RDRR, we required those resources bid at 95% of the cap. And we also have regulations to re-rate those resources in the event that the price in the market is raised from the soft to the hard offer cap. So there's different ways besides the economic bid of those resources that we have in the market to adjust the price formation and attempt to more fully capture the impact of these resources on the market. And I think that the next slide is a better jumping off point for this discussion, because I'm a little bit more clear when I note that these resources in particular, the problem that we're looking at is when they're dispatched, they may put downward pressure on prices, even if they don't represent a resolution of emergency conditions.
All right, I saw Alva's hand kind of go back up. So again, if you want to respond, let's go back to Alva, and Colby, we see you as well. We'll go to you next. So remember, keep that hand up so we can have that back and forth discussion.
Thanks. So just to finish with this, because I think this does explain. So you're basically, this is a problem of incorrect price signaling as you see it in the operational context, or is it incorrect prices in terms of how things should settle or give longer term price signals? I mean, or both?
That's a really interesting distinction. I think that we should talk more about that. Here I've framed it as the problem as the impact on prices is not optimal. But I agree that I think that there's opportunities to also think about how the price or the costs themselves are being represented.
Okay, well, thank you. There's just something to be thinking. I think you presented it well here, and I just wanted to draw that out one step further. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Thanks, Alva. Let's go ahead and move on to Colby.
Your line's unmuted.
Oh, there we go. I think Colby had an audio. He's reconnected now. Colby, can you hear us?
I can hear you now. Sorry about that. I'm not using the dial-in. I'm using the computer here. So I have a quick question. Just on this slide that we're looking at, I'm sorry, the previous slide with the blue sections. Yes, the middle section here, is this also considered like pre-scarcity when there are defined out-of-market solutions, like operator solutions, things of that nature, or is this just like scarcity itself? Is this, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that starts to get a little bit complicated. I can probably offer some resources after this for the community to look at some of the nuances of how the market operator makes these determinations. But the market operator will look at the conditions in the market. There's various conditions that qualify for EA1, EA2, et cetera. And what gets dispatched when depends on a lot of different factors. What is causing the emergency condition, if it's localized, if it's transmission related, if it's outage related, et cetera.
And so from a price formation, and sorry, I'm coming into this a little bit late. I took a little time off, but in the price formation aspect of this, when we look at operators making decisions as it relates to renewable resources, solar hours coming off, but the 16-hour block of exports is still not rolled off yet. So the interchange between solar hours and the final 16-hour block going out to the desert, for instance, has a very, very large interchange that CAISO has had troubles making up for, and then therefore called to the desert utilities to try to import power back into the state of California in an out-of-merit basis. And that clearly has an impact on our pricing formation in the real-time market, where supply or demand dictates supply, right? So I'm just curious if those type of instances, and I'm sorry I went down to the specific instances, if that instance is one that would fall within that category, and if those are the types of things that we're also looking at, is that pre-scarcity management relative to price formation.
Yeah, a couple of things to unpack there. I think on a high level, yes, we're looking at periods when we need more ramping capacity. Right. I think that discussion can be categorized in a couple of different ways. For instance, with the flexible ramping product and some of the topics that James covered last week and the week before. This middle category that you see on the screen may not apply to those ramping conditions if we have sufficient reserves and other capacity online. These are typically called upon when there's more extreme emergency conditions besides just needing to meet that ramp. Yeah.
Okay, got it. But the first
I think
one,
it's all in scope.
That pre-scarcity is in scope. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. Let's go back to or forward to the next slide. Put a little more context for the discussion.
We do have a raised hand, one more raised hand by Dan. Unless you want to take it.
Yeah.
Caller, your line's unmuted. Go ahead.
Thanks, Sylvia. This is Dan Williams from the Energy Authority. Coming in a little bit late here, still haven't figured out how to clone myself to be in multiple meetings at the same time. But I just kind of coming in and looking at the slides before the meeting, but coming in at this point, I believe there are, I would say there's multiple other sources of economic activity that can be happening sort of in and around the market that are not incorporated in LMP during scarcity or pre-scarcity conditions, that I would just ask whether you feel like these should be on the sort of on the list here, on the map for us. And I'll just list out a few that come to mind for me. The first is just, if we have an enacted fast start pricing in the future, sort of coming out of other work in this initiative, then those impacts would not be incorporated in LMP. Any reference level updates that did not get incorporated in resource offers that may be relevant depending on which resource is marginal at the time would not be incorporated in LMP. Any out-of-market purchases on the interties that CAISO operators may be making which we have very little insight to when that is happening, and even after the fact to what prices were paid. Those sources of energy don't get incorporated in LMP, and specifically under the Emergency Energy Assistance Transfer policy, those transfers are specifically not incorporated in LMP. Those are just a few that kind of came to mind. There may be a few others that where there's kind of payments being made for energy that is serving demand during scarcity or pre-scarcity conditions that are not getting fully consumed in the market pricing. I also want to just raise too that with EDAM or even just under EIM, it's really important to think about what is happening in the non-CAISO areas during scarcity or pre-scarcity conditions, actions that non-CAISO BA operators may be taking, or other programs that EIM BAs or future EDAM BAs have that sort of have activity going on during these times that aren't making their way into the energy market prices that the market software is consuming. So curious if you have any thoughts there, any responses or questions around any of that.
Yeah, I really like the way that you have framed this list, just payments being made to energy that isn't fully being reflected in the LMPs. And I think that's a great way to approach this problem statement and what the working group should be thinking about. I wrote down all of your suggestions. It's a great additions to the list. And yeah, I think you're thinking in the right direction here.
So is there an opportunity to, I know we're only in sort of the identify the problem statement phase right now, and solutions are coming in the future. Is there an opportunity to have maybe some more discussion around that list that I laid out? Or I guess I'd invite if that triggered any thoughts for anyone else on the call here about how we should maybe look at some of those going forward.
Yeah, so the next problem statement I have is specifically about storage resources, and I think that's an example of a specific type of payment, or I think you mentioned reference level updates, so that might fall into a category on this list. But I think it also highlights the fact that each of these problems are distinct and unique problems. So I would encourage the working group to come up with a list of these particular problems and start to identify what we want to focus on in the working groups, or what's really solvable here. For example, a lot of what's happening in outside of the EIM, if we can't identify the cost, it's really difficult, or we start to get toward infeasibility and being able to reflect that in LMPs in the market. But there are some other options where we just haven't gotten there yet. For instance, with energy storage, where we can start to really think about how to incorporate reference level updates and opportunity costs better in LMPs. Yeah,
the reference level update thing was more of a gas resource management question, and starting to think through some of the interdependencies between that effort and this one. But since this is kind of the opportunity that we have to think holistically about LMP price formation, what's included in LMP, what's excluded from it, and kind of that list that I laid out, I hope that we can have an opportunity to talk through those. And we do know that there are some limitations within EIM, and that may be there within EDAM for unique circumstances in the non-CAISO part of the market for incorporating sort of out-of-market actions and the price impact of those out-of-market actions. But I think all of those really have to be on the table at this point, because this is the effort that we are undertaking as stakeholders to try and improve policy that is going to be in place for the next, I'm assuming these policies won't sort of result in potential tariff changes, and that would be implemented until sort of 2025, 2026 at the earliest, and then will be in place for the foreseeable future from there, where markets are changing and they do matter. So I hope we can really think holistically, comprehensively about all the different areas where there are things happening that have an opportunity, or maybe should find an opportunity for those to be reflected in the actual market price, so that they can be efficiently incorporated in how the system is set up, which resources get dispatched, how entities bid, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess I'll leave it there. Curious if others have thoughts, or if any other hands came up from that.
I appreciate that high-level
Sorry.
overview. I do want to note, though, that we'll have to have some conversations around, what can be in scope and what's out of scope. Some of the resources that or some of the action items that I put on the previous slide are things that are considered in other initiatives, not within the scope of scarcity pricing, but we can cross that bridge when we get to it, when we start to refine the scope of what topics that we want to consider as a group.
Yeah, thanks, Sylvie, and thank you, Dan. We did have, a couple of reactions, I think, there. So let's tackle those, but I'm going to keep an eye on time. And again, we are going to have, I want to be able to capture the stakeholder conversation in that moment. So let's go ahead and unmute Kyle right now. But we are going to have kind of an open-ended period at the end here for stakeholder discussion as well. So let's go ahead and unmute Kyle, and then Kathleen, Sybil, we see you as well.
Kyle Novice with the Public Advocate's Office. In the discussion so far, and this should be quick, but I've heard the terms pre-scarcity, scarcity, and then as I look forward in the slides, I see shortage and emergency events. I'm just wondering if you could clarify your understanding of the differences between particularly scarcity, shortage, and emergency events. Are these synonyms, or do you distinguish between them? Because I think that overlaying that dimension onto this slide would maybe dictate how we address some of the solutions.
Incredible question. I think you caught a great point. Maybe we should be trying to use the word shortage more often. Scarcity is a great catch-all to describe the pricing convention that we use during shortage conditions. Emergency events, I would categorize as something that the market operator evaluates and determines. Does that help?
Maybe I'll take it back to think about it. Thank you.
Yeah, I can think a little bit more about that and try to codify that for the group.
Thanks.
All right, let's go ahead and go to Kathleen, please.
Thank you. I wanted to keep engaging with what Dan brought up real quickly. He asked if there was any thoughts in what he said. As always, I found it very thought-provoking and took lots of notes, so we'll take it back and think about it more. But my initial blush that I think is worth bringing forward right now, and I was remiss, Kathleen Colbert from Vistra speaking right now. And the first is, I wanted to say that I saw your list here, Sylvie, as examples more than an exhaustive list. And I think that's the right way to receive it. So I like the way you're framing it, same as Alva said. I do think what Dan was leading towards, which is kind of more of an inventory is probably of what that more inclusive list looks like, is a good next step at some point. I want to share my own personal thought on the subject, though, which is that there are so many iterations of these steps, and what they look like, how they're used is not in a consistent way. And I know you said that to the group earlier. There's a lot of complexity around how these decisions are made by the operators. But it's not just CAISO operators. And that's part of what I heard Dan say that I thought was very, very useful. It's also the EIM, the non-CAISO EIM BAA operators. And as we think through this process, I do think we need to continue to be disciplined that when we refer to market operator action, we mean all the operators. And so as a part of this scope, you are going to have to struggle with how do you get the information that you need from the external market grid operators that are taking their own emergency actions but are participating in the real-time market or day-ahead market if it's taken in that time frame to impact that market, but focusing on real-time. I would suggest that one way for us to start thinking about it is what are the existing tools available for the non-CAISO EIM BAA operators to communicate to the CAISO the different kind of reliability elements, right? So we have the functionality for them to identify which transmission lines that they want to be enforced in their internal areas. So we know we have that communication chain. There's also the ability for them to communicate manual dispatches, their equivalent of exceptional dispatches. So we know that that communication chain exists. I think so take that back, Sylvie, and kind of think about it from that perspective. I agree, you can't have transparency into if they're going to do something in advance, but you can build out a communication protocol for those entities to communicate once they do take an action to the CAISO market operator that's running the WEIM or EDAM if it occurs. Does that make sense, Sophie?
Yeah, definitely. I'm not well versed in how the different BA operators communicate, but it's a great line of questioning to follow up on.
Yeah, I think maybe at least if there's a third example is they also have the ability to communicate the amount of demand response that they're forecasting would be available on a given day, which does feed into this, right? So the equivalent, I believe that's included in the RSE on the demand side. So please take that back and kind of do some circle up with, I know that's a different team, so circle up with them and kind of talk through that. But there are multiple ways that the WEIM has kind of thought through some of these out-of-market actions, at least for RSE purposes. So I think in this process, what's in scope is not so much the action or how they communicate it, although you might need to add one more communication line. It's when they communicate that to you, what do the LMPs look like? Is it resulting in a price formation that's rational? So that's kind of how I'm contextualizing the link to this one for that item. The second thing with the reference level adjustment, I do think what Dan is suggesting is in scope, but I'd frame it and clarify what I heard, which is you can submit a reference level adjustment, and that's subject to an ex-ante verification and subject to a reasonableness threshold. That if your reference level adjustment is above that threshold, you are limited. If a resource that submitted a reference level adjustment was limited by that reasonableness threshold, that resource is eligible to receive that cost recovery if it can validate it after the fact, right? But the market doesn't receive any kind of true up as a result of that. It just wasn't contemplated in 831 compliance at the time. What I heard Dan suggest is that a discussion worth having here is, well, if that resource was marginal and after the fact the CAISO decides that reference level adjustment that was limited was an accurate representation of cost that could have been approved, i.e. it's below 2,000, and you're making the resource whole but not the market, then you have a disconnect between what the actual final LMP is versus what is the cost that was approved for that marginal resource. And I do think that's a valid scope item for price formation.
Got it. Thanks, Kathleen. And maybe just a clarification for the group. I've mentioned one or two times the energy emergency alerts, EEAs. And this is a tool that market operators do use to communicate with each other. EEA is required to receive emergency assistance from other BAs. So if you weren't sure what Kathleen was talking about, that's one of those things where the ISO will, for instance, put out an EEA2, and that means the ISO is requesting emergency energy from all resources and has activated other emergency energy programs. So I'll just finish up what's going on in this slide.
Oh, well, sorry, Sylvie. I was talking to double mute there. No, I appreciate that. And just for everybody, we do have our emergency notification fact sheet in the chat here. So I do, Sylvie does kind of move on into a couple of other perspectives here. But let's go ahead. We have two hands up right now. Let's go ahead and go to Callie. JK, we'll go to you. And then again, we are going to have kind of that open dialogue forum at the end here. But this is great conversation. So thank you very much. We're wanting stakeholders to react off of each other, to Dan's point. So really appreciate this engagement. Let's go ahead and unmute Callie, please.
Hi, this is Callie Wells with WPTF. I'll be brief. I just wanted to kind of follow along the line of conversation with Dan and Kathleen. I think all of their points were extremely valid. I too took this slide as not an exhaustive list. So I think, I agree, I think a really good next step would be to kind of come up with, I think Kathleen phrased it as an inventory of all the actions that, CAISO operators do, as well as EIM operators have the ability to do. But I think another level of information that might be useful, especially when we start thinking of price formation as we near scarcity conditions, and then once we're in shortage conditions, I think it would be useful to the extent possible, somehow link the various actions up with, what actions occur as operators start to see the market get into those tighter and tighter supply conditions. Maybe I think Dan used the term pre-scarcity conditions. Almost, I'm kind of envisioning a timeline, maybe. I'm sure there's a better term out there that's just not occurring to me at the moment, but a timeline of the actions they take as the conditions start to tighten, and then once we're actually in shortage conditions or emergency conditions, because I think that'll be really important when we start looking at the price formation that's occurring at those various, under those various actions and the market conditions that those actions are taken. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation. I think that would be a really good conversation to have, down the road as, that we do come up with an exhaustive list or an inventory of all the actions that are taken.
That's a good idea. Thanks, Callie.
Thank you. Yeah, you know what? This is. I don't want to stop discussion here. So Sylvie, do we perhaps? So guys, leave your hands up, please. But do you want to go ahead and maybe let's go to 13, kind of finish out on this problem statement, and then we can come back and kind of continue this conversation.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so Stuart, I see you. JK, I see you. Sybil, I see you in chat. Thank you very much. Let's go ahead and if we could move to 13, please.
All right. So I framed the discussion so far as there are examples of actions that we might be taking in the market that aren't fully encompassed by price formation. It's not an exhaustive list, and we would like to come up with some sort of inventory to more broadly discuss those. The impact that we're worried about is that these actions might put downward pressure on prices, confounding the economic signal intended to help us resolve shortages. So preliminary options for discussion. I've already heard a few from Dan, from Kathleen. I've put two here on the slide. The first is a price floor. We see this, for example, this is something that we've in some form applied to RDRR. And I just wanted to take the broader perspective that a price floor is an administrative way to prevent prices from collapsing. And that in contrast to something like a value of lost load. Again, not necessarily proposing this as a solution to things, but as an example of an opportunity cost or a way for something that we can incorporate into the price signal to better reflect the economic opportunity, to reduce the market's potential reliance on other market operator interventions. Now I will pause and we can keep getting comments in.
All right, thank you, Sylvie. And I think that might kind of add to the conversation. So why don't we go ahead? Sybil, I see you in the chat. I don't know if you want to raise your hand and verbalize it. I'm happy to do so as far as your comment. Yeah. But Sybil also adds, to Dan's point on, this topic that's come up of this inventory. Again, we are going to have a comment template. Now that we're at the end of our sprint here of 3 sessions, consecutive sessions here talking about scarcity pricing, we are going to have a comment template. So point well heard, Sybil. And I think people will have an opportunity to kind of continue to opine on that inventory via that comment template. Let's go ahead and unmute Sybil, please.
As it relates to this most recent slide, I think it's important to recognize that we are moving towards a unique market design with the EDAM. And so, recognizing that some of these impacts are not directly, in the prior discussions, the last couple of sessions here, we've seen why some of this pricing is not going to be directly reflected for EDAM and EIM. And so I think it's important to recognize that, given the unique market construct we're facing here, looking at things like administrative pricing, for example, to reflect better the signal that we're trying to send to the broader market is a reasonable consideration. And that right now it is really important to keep the broader market view in scope for this discussion, because that's where the region is headed. So thanks, Dan, for all of your points. And hopefully you can put a specific question in the comment template to ask for further sort of inventory on these topics and conditions that can have incorrect price signals showing up. Thanks.
Thank you, Sybil. Appreciate that. So, JK, let's go back to you. Appreciate your patience here.
For the presentation. I think you stated the problem very clearly and very well. I do have a follow-up question, Alva's question. When we talk about the problem statement and related to the solution option here, we say these out-of-market actions were not captured by price formation. I want to make sure I understand when we say price formation, do we have any specific linkage of the price formation to the reserve demand curve or the price formation itself? Because when we talk about out-of-market actions, my first reaction is if it's not directly reflected in the price in the market, the cost will be reflected after market and there's a discrepancy. Is the goal more to address a discrepancy, or the goal is to address, certain condition that you want to use a demand curve as a mechanism to capture?
I think it depends on the problem that we're looking at, JK, but either of those are things that we'd like to look at.
Yeah, because when I look at the options the Kaiser provided here, it seems that already falls into the category of the demand curve. Like, we have a price floor or these, they are not really, in the broader scope to bridge the cost and price discrepancy. But yeah, I guess, my question was like, to what scope shall we consider this discussion? If that's more like, shall we narrow it down, like center everything around the demand curve itself, or it actually allow us to think in a broader way, including the aftermarket settlement and big cost of recovery, things like that?
I think I'd like to flip that question back on stakeholders and keep it open for the moment. as stakeholders start to think about what we might put in the inventory for scope.
Yeah, no, Sylvia, I would agree with that. And JK, I think you framed it really well. And again, you know, that there's that optionality that I think we'd like folks to react to and kind of give us that feedback, because we're presenting potentials here. So I think what's one of the reasons we decided to kind of do this sprint and wait until the end to take those official comments back, because they are, you know, left of the line, right of the line, impacts the pricing, but there's an interconnection to all of them. So actually, any reactions to JK? Well, Kathleen, let's go ahead and go to you. Stuart, I saw your hand pop up, which I'm assuming is a reaction to JK. But Kathleen, you've been waiting for us. Let's go to you. Stuart, I'm putting a pin in your hand here, and we'll come to you right afterwards.
Great, no, thank you. Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. And I can react to JK because what I was going to throw out there is along the same lines of the slide you have here kind of refers to two options, but within that second option, I see more than just the concept of a demand curve or an ORDC kind of solution. Vistra has asked CAISO when we submitted our written comments in the beginning of this effort and kind of laid out our priorities. This problem statement is definitely a priority. One of the solutions that we have put forward and asked you to evaluate is a reliability deployment price adder, which is at least that's what it is called in Texas. So I know we provided you the link for the protocol information for it, and we've offered to present on what it is and how it's used in other markets and do that with other stakeholders that also have experience in Texas. You know, Vistra has operations across the country in all markets except for SPP. So we've taken this issue back, and in our discussions, we think this is a very viable option, although there's complexity to it, like there is with everything else here, right? And so, but we want to make sure that we have that discussion that's on the table. Rather than a price floor or demand curve, an RDPA is an estimation of what the market prices would have been due to the above, without the out-of-market actions that resulted in the prices being suppressed or shifting away from what the equilibrium should have been. So it is an after-the-fact calculation. It is an administrative approach, and so I know that there's trade-offs there, but it's a little different than a price floor. It has less inefficiencies, in my opinion, as an economist. That an adder that ensures that the prices are corrected to reflect what the LMP should have been, with perfect transparency into all of the supply being used or available, is a more economically rational way to ensure that the prices are being set for settlement and clearance purposes, even if it does require some administrative actions after the fact with some kind of price correction.
Thanks, Kathleen. No, and we do noted. We have your comments, and you know we're happy you're still willing to present, because I think that's something that you know, perhaps we can really dedicate some time to. So I'll reach out to you offline on that presenting, and if any other stakeholders are similarly interested, I think that might be a very interesting conversation. Stuart, let's go ahead and go to Stuart. He raised his hand and oh, yeah. Who was that? Was that you, Sylvie, or was that Kathleen?
It may have been Kathleen.
Oh. Kathleen, would you mind putting your hand back up? Okay, let's go ahead and unmute Kathleen. Sorry about that, Kathleen. Stuart, Dan, just hold on a second. We'll get to you next.
So I'm sorry. I just wanted to close the loop and say that I hope that sheds a little bit more light onto how I took what JK said, which is there will persist these issues where it's not going to be perfectly possible in the market run itself, based on how CAISO's market is currently designed, to correct that cost price dynamic that she was describing. So that's just wanted to circle and close up and make sure you're connecting the dots between what JK said and what I was proposing to just continue to discuss.
Thanks, Kathleen. Let's go ahead and let's go to Dan. Kind of continue this this reaction here.
Thanks, Dan from TEA, and apologies to Stuart if you're having to wait with that pin in your hand for a while. Just kind of tying this together with the comments that I made about making sure that things are durable within EIM and EDAM, and I think what Kathleen and JK are bringing to the table kind of tie that together, because it's a looking at something like that reliability deployment price adder. That's something that could be applied out into the other areas with certain trigger conditions being met, and those could be easily identifiable, and that adder could be applied broadly. It sort of creates a policy that unites across all of the markets that CAISO is responsible for the pricing within. I think we have to continue to drill down on that further. I think it would be very useful to look at some of the recent high price events, look at what was going on in the system, look at congestion impacts, think about how new market products coming in are going to change some things as well. But I just really like the idea of sort of running a litmus test of what is broadly applicable across all markets as a solution.
No, Dan, thank you, and appreciate those comments. And I think, well, we could definitely take that more targeted look there and kind of continue this conversation. Stuart, I'm not sure if it was my going back to Kathleen. I apologize to change the order up for me. Let's pull that pin out of your hand. Please go ahead, sir.
Reflecting on when operators are taking action, I think it's worth considering that sometimes operators oftentimes operators are taking actions for information technology system or data issues, and whether or not that has an impact on energy price, it may or it may not. So as we look at operator actions, it's maybe worth considering why. They don't necessarily capture why they take some of those actions, but it may be that the underlying data or the network they're looking at is not, the data is not correct, and they're trying to correct for that. And as I say, that may or may not have an impact on the energy price, but that all feeds into the discussion here. So I think it's worth thinking about that when we look at operator actions in that data.
Yeah, great distinction, Stuart. And maybe I'll clarify for the rest of the group that the market operator does take actions often and regularly. We have things called load conformance, where they want to make the market operator is tasked with making sure that supply equals load at all times, even if the price is a little bit off. What we're really talking about here are the market operator actions taken in emergency conditions as a last resort when the market itself isn't able to attract sufficient supply to meet all of our energy and reserve obligations. And at the end of the day, those the market operator actions that we are trying to reduce our reliance on in this scenario are those that we're considering as inefficient by nature, but we've got to do it because we don't have any other options at that point.
Okay, thank you. And just it popped in my head, Dan. We will be similar to our summer reports. We will be and are working on. We'll be publishing and are working on a winter report, and it'll capture. This is something you brought up in our last sprint session, the recent conditions up in the Pacific Northwest with this cold snap. So I think, we're actively working on that, and we'll have that data that may very well, served to really inform this conversation. So I just wanted to kind of circle back to that point and slip my mind until just now. Sylvie, I do not see any other hands, and I think we are good for you to, the floor is yours to move to the next problem statement or potential problem statement.
Great, let's do it. All right. I know Kathleen is excited about this one. Energy storage resource bids and default energy bids are limited to a bid cap of $1,000 per megawatt hour, which may not reflect opportunity costs in tight system conditions when the bid cap is raised to $2,000 per megawatt hour. And let me start this discussion with a caveat quickly that we have recently had a policy initiative on energy storage enhancements that contemplated the opportunity cost for energy storage resources and DEBs in the day-ahead market. So re-litigating that discussion is not within the scope here. We are specifically talking about what happens in this FERC Order 781 condition when we raise the bid cap from the soft to hard. So let's go to the next slide. Great. So why is this the problem and what is the impact? Well, frankly, we're not entirely sure if it's a problem, but that'll be up to stakeholders to investigate and discuss. The technical problem here is that absent a defined opportunity cost for storage resources, the ISO systems can't process these resources requests bid above the soft offer cap. So they are limited to $1,000 per megawatt hour, even if, and that's an if, they have opportunity costs and conditions that might necessitate a higher bid. If that's the case, then storage resources may be dispatched inefficiently or inefficiently early, which would put downward pressure on prices leading up to a shortage. And just generally, inappropriately charged or discharged storage capacity increases our reliance on manual actions and the use of operational constraints. And I included operational constraints here as a nod to some administrative actions that we've taken around energy storage regulation, like the state of charge. Next slide. So this is an illustration of why we think that this is a problem. This is from the CAISO Summer Market Performance Report that looked at September 2022. You see on September 6th, which I've put in a purple box here, the SMEC starts rising above $1,000, and we get energy storage being dispatched pretty early in the day, much earlier than was intended or that we would have liked it to. And then we see a price dip during the evening ramp, and we would expect prices to be increasing and continue to increase. So this highlights a potential problem and the issue that we described in the first problem statement, where not fully capturing resources or resource impact in the market or costs in price formation may put downward pressure on prices.
Okay, we had two hands pop up here, Sylvie, but I think this is the perfect slide to really kind of open it up, right? The different options for discussion. So guys, let's, Sylvie, why don't you go ahead and share your thoughts on this slide, and then Callie, Alva, Chris, we'll go to you.
Yeah, so final thoughts on this slide. We don't know if the opportunity cost would rise above $1,000 or not. And again, we've had stakeholder discussions around what an opportunity cost looks like for storage and that cost adder. So we're really just contemplating the scenario where prices rise from 1,000 to 2,000. Does that logic that exists need to be reconsidered or adapted for this scenario? And we might consider, you know, under what circumstances opportunity costs for storage resources would be over $1,000. That is where I'll pause and see what everyone thinks.
Yeah, no, very good. So again, this is a great kind of open forum. So let's go ahead and go to Callie. If you're reacting to a comment made by another stakeholder, if you could kindly just let me know in the chat so we can keep that discussion going. But for right now, we have Callie, we have Alva, we have Chris. Let's start with Callie, please.
Hi, it's Callie Wills with WPTF. First of all, I appreciate you guys putting this problem statement out there. I guess my comment is a little bit higher level, but along these lines is I think there are other resource types that also are having the same situation when prices rise to 2,000. So I was hoping to see those make their way into this conversation as well. I think PDR is one of them. When we hit the $2,000 bid cap, they cannot bid above 1,000. And I think there you're going to see some inefficient dispatches. They'll be dispatched similar to storage, right? They're going to be dispatched earlier than what ideally would be the case. I also do wonder if hydro resources are experiencing something similar, because their DEB 2, if I'm recalling correctly, when that was updated a couple of years ago, does have this opportunity cost component in it. And to the extent if they go through that reference level adjustment process, they're denied because it's not a direct one-to-one link to a fuel cost, like a gas cost. I am wondering if maybe they too are experiencing something similar and should be incorporated into this conversation. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there, that maybe this not focusing strictly on storage, but also including the other resource types that have the very similar situation today.
Thanks, Callie. I had also thought about PDR when putting together this presentation. It is a somewhat different problem, so I didn't want to lump it in with storage, but you are correct. It's similar in that we don't currently have a defined way for PDR to verify that its costs are above 1,000. Yeah, so that's on our list.
Yeah, great. And you have any insights into the hydro situation? That did just occur to me as well. Again, if they go through the reference level adjustment, I know one of the reasons PDR can't do that is because they don't have that fuel component, like a gas cost component. So I think hydro might be in the same situation. I just, if you have any insights into that, that would be great as well.
I would need to double check. Let me double check for you, but my instinct is the reference level systems do allow for opportunity costs as a way to verify resource costs above $1,000. So the issue that we're looking at with storage is that we haven't defined specifically what a storage opportunity cost in that scenario looks like, but resources with opportunity costs can bid above that $1,000 cap. So I'm pretty sure that hydro falls into that category because we've already gone through the process of defining what that looks like for them. But let me double check on that. Yeah, that would be great. I would just, if they have it defined and the CAISO accepts that and approves it, that's great. Or if they fall into the bucket of storage or PDR where maybe the CAISO is not approving those, that would be useful to know as well. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that hydro is not within the problem area. But yeah, okay. Great. All right. Yeah, that just occurred to me today, so I just wanted to double check on that one. So thanks.
Thanks, Callie. Appreciate that. Let's go ahead and, well, I see hands going up and down here. Let's go to Alva.
Hello, Alva from PG&E. I don't want to relitigate anything, Sylvia, but I think the concept of the storage default energy bid is intended to capture within day opportunity costs. So essentially there's a calculation that's being done which is meant to be a good estimate of what the value will be in the highest value hours of the day. Some form of that is being done day ahead and in real time. My opinion is that when I realize perhaps part of the tension here is that CAISO, is forced by the tariff to put the bid cap to $2,000, and possibly in situations where they don't think it should go to $2,000. But that's not neither here nor there. In my opinion, when the price cap is modified to $2,000, there is a high likelihood that resources will bid into that range between $1,000 and $2,000. And part of the intent was to bring those resources into the bid stack as they in some intended way. And therefore, there's a call for a modification of the expected prices that would be seen in the highest value hours. I think the approach that's being taken now is a surrogate for being able to say this is what the prices will be, and I mean, maybe this is just too dumb of a response to what you're saying, but it just seems to me that there's an expectation that the prices will be higher, and therefore the price the bid cap should be modified accordingly. When the opportunity cost for other resources is allowed to be $2,000, and when the bid cap for other resources, which represents their opportunity costs in these cases, is modified to be $2,000, it seems to me consistent with the approach by which opportunity costs are calculated for batteries, that the discharge price should be at least $2,000. They even have to recover an arbitrage as well, and the prices for charging may be so high that even then it's difficult to actually get $2,000 of value out of discharge. So that's just, I'm just saying the obvious, but it just seems to me that this in terms of the intent of the default energy bid for storage, it should be increased under those circumstances.
Appreciate those comments, Alva. Again, hands kind of coming up and down here, so don't hesitate. We will get to you. Let's go to Chris first, and then Kathleen, you're up next.
Hi, this is Chris Devon. Can you hear me all right?
We can, Chris. Go ahead.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, Chris Devon, TerraGen. So I have some strong opinions on this one. You know, so just want to express, I think, first off, thank you for considering the issue in this venue. I would say that this certainly is a problem in our view. I agree with, you know, Callie, and particularly with what Alva was just mentioning. So I won't rehash that, but I do want to maybe provide another example here. And first off, I would just say, you know, again, it's definitely a problem, and we should try to address it as soon as possible. And particularly, I would just recommend trying to address it before this summer, and it could probably be done maybe just through some BPM changes, I think. But I would just say, with all due respect, this is an oversight by CAISO in the implementation of this Order 831. You know, storage bid cap issue, and frankly, the CAISO didn't even discuss storage or this type of an impact to storage within those Order 831 proceedings, and it's not even mentioned in the FERC filings or anything. So, you know, I think essentially, you know, with what Alva was mentioning, just to build on that a little bit, you know, and try to draw a little bit of a contrast. You know, again, this is not about that, you know, opportunity cost-based DEB thing that was from the Energy Storage Enhancements Initiative. This is all about when this bid cap raises to 2,000. Storage absolutely should have the right to bid up to that 2,000, and it doesn't necessarily need to be based on this, you know, type of fuel cost verification or any type of other verification, because there clearly is an opportunity cost that's higher than the $1,000 bid cap that they have when prices, as Alva noted, you know, are expected to reach up into the $1,000 to $2,000 range. CAISO has obviously witnessed this happening with the examples that have been stated on the prior slides. It is not efficient to use these use-limited resources that have limited duration output capabilities in earlier periods that are lower priced. That's simply not what the market should do. So there is an error here that's happening. It has significant financial impacts on resources that then cannot be dispatched at those highest price periods. You know, I strongly encourage CAISO to take a look at how to address this very quickly. And one more thing I wanted to mention here is under 831 compliance, for CAISO allows for non-resource specific imports and exports to bid up to $2,000 with no justification. So this is a major problem because that's essentially going to force storage to be discharged or curtail charging schedules inappropriately, inefficiently. And you know, for example, day-ahead imports can try to you know, schedule in real time to or essentially buy back their position in real time by submitting those bids above $1,000, and then that causes storage resources that can't bid above 1,000 to then have to curtail their charging schedules or to discharge inappropriately early. So we're essentially allowing external resources or external marketing import bids to impact the financial viability of storage resources on the system, and we're also, you know, impacting the overall efficient pricing of the market because those higher priced you know, imports are displacing the storage resources, which really do have a higher opportunity cost, or at least an equal opportunity cost to those other resources, those non-resource specific imports. Similarly, real-time exports could also offset or displace those storage charging or discharging schedules in the same manner. So these things need to be addressed, and you know, we strongly view this as something that should be done quicker, or raised up with you know, some sort of high priority to try to get this done before the summer, if possible. So let me stop there. Thank you.
And thank you, Chris. Sylvie, I have just a couple of thoughts, but not on quite a technical level, I would assume. Do you have any reaction to Chris there?
No, I think everything that you just said was totally valid. You know, I'll note that on the proposed solution screen, I said develop a logic. I heard you say we might not even have to. This could be a simple VPM change. Let's go back and find out what's feasible. And if the stakeholder community wants to prioritize this is a good venue for it.
Yeah. No, thank you, Sylvie. And you went right where I was wanting to go. So, you know, if anybody else would like to, Kathleen, we'll go to you, but, you know, part of the working group conversation is for us to be able to understand what is a priority for the stakeholder community. So if anybody has, you know, any kind of reaction to Chris and, you know, the prioritization effort of this, please feel free to chime in here. We want to hear that feedback from you. Kathleen, let's go ahead and unmute Kathleen and eager to hear your thoughts.
Thank you. Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. I want to echo everything all the other speakers have already said. I don't want to repeat anything they've said, so I will echo that this is an incredibly important issue. It is one of the top issues for us in this effort. And I think there are a few ways that you can look at it, not just from what's a reasonableness threshold kind of approach you might take, what's a change to real-time default energy bid calculations that would be like a consistent change for the normal DEB, the reasonableness thresholds used just for the reference level adjustments, or as Chris mentioned, recognizing that opportunity cost-based resources during market conditions when the max import bid screen or offers above 1,000 are triggering changes to the penalty prices, and where imports and exports can offer above the 1,000 cap up to 2,000. Those are three like general categories I think are really worth discussing. So let's for sure I'd like to see us commit to continuing the discussion if that's the kind of feedback you're looking for, and going through like the pros and cons of kind of those three general ideas of improving the DEB for real time, thinking about a reference level adjustment, and potentially just changing the market policy for opportunity cost resources during stress conditions would be my three general categories. I do think I'll say about Important context for the 831 compliance is that at the time that 831 compliance was being done, storage was not subject to mitigation. There was no storage default energy bid on a regular market operations basis. So there wasn't the ability to design a quote unquote reasonableness threshold that would be more specific to storage under that CCW reference level adjustment logic because they weren't subject to mitigation. They also have intraday opportunity costs, the same as imports, exports. So there is a lot of elegance to what Chris was saying about thinking about them along the same lines of the storage offer is competing with supporting an export or not in certain conditions. And that's an elegant way to look at it and make sure that everyone's comfortable with the market decision. And currently the market decision is use the storage to support not only internal but external needs. And that's the current design. And so I agree with Chris, we need to look at it. But at the time, like I said, storage was not subject to mitigation. And so that's a part of why that this hasn't been discussed in this level of detail. And I think that's important context.
Thanks for that, Kathleen.
Yeah, and I'll add on to Kathleen's comment that the reason why we don't have a way for storage resources to bid over $1,000 at the moment is not, because we forgot to put it in. We do need to have a transparent stakeholder discussion around whether or not the applicability of the current opportunity cost applies in this scenario. It could be a super simple answer. It may not be, as Kathleen just highlighted a couple of nuances to that discussion, but we still need to have it before going ahead to implement those changes.
Yeah, and
absolutely.
Sylvia,
looking forward to that discussion. Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, Kathleen. Sylvia, before you move, I don't see any other hands. Before we move on, I just think, this prioritization type of a conversation, it is definitely part of the working group context, and I think its intent is more on the different problem statements or issues that we've identified together as a group, kind of understanding what your prioritization is for us to develop those solutions. But for an item like this that kind of might need that additional stakeholdering, as Sylvie just put, I do want to kind of put a plug in just because it's timely. It's right around the corner. We have our stakeholder catalog call coming up on January 30th, and that application window is in February. So again, just multiple different mechanisms. Your feedback is heard and it's going to be communicated, but just wanted to highlight that item for the stakeholder community to submit requests like that to address something really quickly and kind of figure out that prioritization and feasibility for us. So Sylvie, actually, before we move on, we do have Perry's hand came up here, and thank you, Brenda. That call on 1:30, she just linked there in chat. Let's go ahead and unmute Perry, please.
You at CISA, can you hear me?
We can.
Excellent, thanks. I just wanted to say, give my little 2 cents on this. Is I think at the time when we were doing 831, I really see it as an implementation mistake here, because if you review all of the policy discussions already been had back whenever we did that policy, and the tariff is actually seems to be clear as well. So it just looks to me like it was an oversight in the implementation, which is why I don't think it's necessarily a policy discussion at this point. It's just that this cap at 1,000 doesn't make any sense and shouldn't even be there. So I just wanted to add that I don't really see the need for any extended discussion on the topic for something that was just an implementation mistake.
So we did hear from our technology team that there wasn't sufficient detail in the policy in order to implement the change. So it is going to be a policy discussion.
So
it may be a simple one, but...
Well, they've implemented one thing, which is clearly wrong. So I don't know if there was insufficient detail in the policy back then. How did they implement what they implemented without solving the policy problem? So again, I think the best course of action here would be to just correct the implementation problem, and move on.
I'll be a little bit more specific. The detail that we need is not, you know, we do have a defined opportunity cost in certain situations for storage. The implementation details that we need from the stakeholder community is to confirm how to consider opportunity cost, if and how to consider opportunity costs above $1,000, which is not explicit currently.
I thought I should mention also, I mean, this is, I'm a little urgent about this, is because effectively what the current implementation mistake does is it forces energy storage resources to sell exports out of California, because it forces them to have a lower bid than their actual opportunity cost, which should be the bid cap. And by doing that, the imports, no check on them, are allowed to bid higher than that. And therefore, it's a forced export from an energy storage resource out of the California ISO. So it seems to me it's an obvious implementation mistake that just needs to be corrected. The storage resources need to at least be bidding as high as the bid cap, whatever that bid cap may be, or else you're going to force them to sell exports out of California.
Yeah,
so
with you on
I
the
would ask
urgency
for
of the problem. Yeah.
I would ask for an expedited timeline on this fix, actually. And definitely before summer.
Yeah, and I'll replug what Juan said. We did start from scratch with the stakeholder catalog, and this will need to be added. Deadline is January 30th. Let's get on it.
Are there...
Yeah, Perry, you got a lot of hands up here.
Are you hearing that the urgency here, though, is an implementation mistake causing a forced export outside of California from energy storage resources? And you want to go through a policy process for that.
No, Perry, sorry, Sylvia, if you don't mind, Perry, we're definitely hearing that urgency. We're hearing the timeline. We're hearing and seeing, just with hands raised here, kind of sentiment in the stakeholder community. So this is definitely feedback that we're going to be taking back. So yeah, to answer your question, absolutely, urgency heard.
All right, thanks, Juan.
Yep. Kathleen, I saw you put your hand up. Alva, Doug, we see you as well. Let's go ahead and move to Kathleen. Kathleen, you may be double muted. I see you unmuted on the WebEx.
Oh, thank you, Juan. This is Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. This is a very serious problem statement, and it's one that has massive market impacts that frankly undermines reliability when the storage fleet is being mismanaged due to a market design that has not been implemented as it was intended. So 831 does intend for, like the FERC rule, intends for resources with opportunity costs to be able to bid above 1,000 up to 2,000 subject to an ex-ante verification. The CCW paper, and Sylvia, with all due respect, and please hear this as with that respect for you, with the knowledge of the intent of that writing, it was contemplated to apply to all resource types. The specific methodology for implementation, as Perry's saying, an implementation decision, not a policy decision, implementation. I agree. We didn't have a dev at the time for storage, so I didn't pen in my appendices, my like 200-page document, a formula for IT to use, because I believe and have faith that now that we do have experience operating storage, it can be developed with a simple BPM clarification of what that reasonableness threshold formula is. The policy for non-thermal resources under the reasonableness threshold is very consistent with thermals. They're supposed to have the ability to update their costs under the board-approved policy. And we applied a multiplier onto the fuel equivalent cost component of that kind of standard DEB calculation. Now that you have a storage DEB, what we need to do is just take a step back in this working group, talk through the opportunity cost component, and agree on what the reasonableness thresholds implementation for that OC is going to include. I do not see that as a policy change because 831 and CCW apply to all resource types that had a mitigated DEB, and now storage does, so it should apply to storage. And frankly, the reliability risk that this market design issue introduces is something that grid operations should be knocking at your door for you to add to the catalog. So I do expect to see it in the catalog if it's not already there. I also want you to know this specific issue, stakeholders, storage owners, and operators have been raising for years. I presented on this concern back at the first storage workshop from Energy Storage Enhancements with graphs of specific days and what the challenge that this results in. It is not a new issue. I'm happy that CAISO is finally sitting up and prioritizing it, but you're doing that because you saw an actual operation that it harms your reliability. So please take this seriously and just fix the implementation issue for this summer.
Thanks, Kathleen. No, appreciate that. And we appreciate, you kind of pointing back to, that past presentation. We'll definitely take a look at. So let's get something really, I see Becky's hand up. Could we go ahead and unmute Becky as a reaction here?
Robinson here at the ISO. I just wanted to chime in, Kathleen Perry. I hear the comments on this issue. I think we agree. I know in this conversation in these working groups we are in listening mode and do want to hear from stakeholders. What you guys consider problems, and so we're perhaps hesitant to say which ones we definitely see as problems versus which ones are a maybe and so forth. But I'm happy to share. We to your point, we've had plenty of internal conversations that this is an issue. And Kathleen, to your point, I do see it as an operational issue as well, right? I mean, there's the price impact of the storage being dispatched early in the day in that graph that Sylvie showed. But then there's also the sort of physical operational, component of that means that you've used up some of your state of charge that you don't then have later in the day to manage the net peak load, where generally we want to be saving the storage, so to speak, to use at that time period. So I just wanted to chime in and let you guys know that we definitely hear you. I was chatting with Juan offline as well about sort of, do stakeholders need to put this in the catalog versus it's teed up here in this price formation enhancements workshop, so we're talking about it. I think we know it's an issue. I think it's an issue that we want to work, and I hear the request that from Perry that it would be great to have this fixed by this summer, and that should be on our list of things for this summer. I'm happy to take it back in terms of, is this does this require a tariff change? What level of policy conversation do we need to have around this? given that it's not a new issue that's being surfaced today for the first time. Certainly, I think that's fair. I think and happy to follow up with you both offline in terms of the question about storage resources weren't subject to mitigation. It sounded like I heard from you, Kathleen, when the 831 compliance was put together. So that's why that didn't speak to storage versus whether it should be sort of already implicitly sort of covered in a way, covered in a way for storage already based on sort of the broad brush strokes of what that policy did say. Happy to work through that with you guys. I think to the point, I agree that this is something that needs to be it needs to continue to be on our radar. We need to continue to kind of work it. Also happy to, of course, hear from other stakeholders on the issue, but I just wanted to chime in with that. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Becky. Yeah, no, and appreciate that clarification, right? And I think we actually had a comment in the chat kind of to that similar effect about it coming up here in PFE potentially as a track item. So we appreciate that that clarity you just provided there. Let's go ahead and head over to Alva. If we could unmute Alva, please.
Hi, Alva from PG&E. I was going to try to weigh in on perhaps on the side of Sylvie or perhaps on the side of unforeseen side effects. I think the urgency is heard, and I think the changing of what can be bid in cyber, which I'm not even sure about that constraint, but allowing storage to bid up to a level of 2,000 is trivial. I think the issue is the calculation of the DEB, because many batteries are subject to market power mitigation, and they are mitigated based on prices that have been seen historically. And so changing that construct to look forward is actually a big change. I think my personal opinion is you should look at, I agree with the urgency for the summer, but you should look at a much more blanket type of emergency change where you would simply say that storage can bid to 2,000 and there's no mitigation or something of that sort, as opposed to doing this correctly over a more leisurely period of time, where you try to figure out how you're going to actually incorporate future value of which you kind of know is there, like I was arguing, and as everybody has been arguing, into the very clearly, and I think it may even be in the tariff definition of how storage default energy bids are constructed. So I just want to point out that that's actually a pretty complicated topic, and maybe even contentious, at least between CAISO and battery operators, in terms of what's a reasonable way to do that. So I think it's urgent. I just would suggest that you look at emergency measures rather than thinking that you can actually just fix this. I'm not sure I agree with Barry that it's something that can be simply, we can unwind and then rewind into a different approach, because putting future prices into default energy bids for batteries then leads to questions about how future opportunity costs are represented for other resources, as Callie pointed out, and it's a can of worms. Thank you.
Thank you, Alva. Appreciate you sharing your perspective there. Doug, let's go ahead and move to Doug. And then Callie and Perry, I saw both your hands kind of come up while Alva was talking. I'm assuming that's in reaction to it, but let's go to Doug and then we'll go back to you guys.
Bay Area Municipal Transmission Group. I agree with what Alva just said, but I am a little bit concerned that just raising the bids to 2,000 still doesn't get us where we really need to be, which is to reflect the marginal cost to put the energy in the storage, because we're really talking for the most part about very short duration storage, and their costs are more knowable, right? We know how much it costs to charge them that day prior to them getting discharged. What we don't know is if there's any other additional variable costs, and those might vary by operator. But the efficiency factors for the resources are in the master file. They may not be accurate, may not reflect how those change based on the state of charge of the battery, but they could at least be approximated. But maybe it's there's been implementation problems that I'm not aware of that's been challenging. I think we should, if we have to just allow bidding up to the cap, fine. But I think what would be much better is to reflect what it costs to put the energy in, which, as long as we get above that cost to take it out, we should be happy, and that'll send a better price signal. I think we also ought to consider other measures that we can take to address this issue. And I think one pretty simple thing would be to allow the storage resources to, even if they're flexible RA resources, to just self-schedule in real time to match their day-ahead awards. And if we allowed that, we would get the resources charged that we expected we would need to be fully charged early in the day, and they would be available to discharge when we expected them day ahead to be needed to discharge. And that would address this concern Perry raised about the resources getting exported too soon in the day. Now, maybe we can't allow 100% of the resources to self-schedule because some are needed. We need their flexibility in real time to deal with real-time changes from what was expected day ahead. But we don't need all of it. Do we need 95 or 5% or 10% or 20%? It's certainly not 100%. A lot of that flexibility was needed to meet the ramp, which is very, very predictable. So I think this is and it's a policy change because you're basically changing a flex RA bidding requirement. But it would be a lot easier to implement because you just relax that requirement.
Thanks for that feedback, Doug.
Thank you, Doug. Sylvia, any reaction before we go to Perry or Chris?
I say keep the conversation going.
Okay. Perry, let's go ahead and let you respond to that. Or have your own new topic. Sorry, I made an assumption there, Perry. Go ahead.
Hey, this is Perry Servideo CISA. You actually made the right assumption there. But no, I just wanted to kind of respond to Alva and Doug. They raise good points, but I don't want to conflate the two issues because there's really two issues. It's one is the DEB, which is not the portion that I'm talking about right now, and the way that opportunity cost is reflected in the DEB. What we see now, though, as the main issue that was the implementation mistake that actually predates the development of that DEB is to just allow the bidding. If the bid cap is raised, you have to allow these resources to raise their bids at a minimum. That's a minimum implementation here. So I just didn't want to. I didn't want one to bog down the other. I mean, they don't have to. They're two separate issues. And then we can have a discussion on DEB. Although I'll just say that the solution on the DEB side is not as difficult as maybe they're making it seem. But we can come up with that solution. And actually part of it might really be fixed if they could just bid higher. I think you'll solve a lot of the problems. Next point I wanted to make, just to reiterate, because Kathleen made a very good point. I was talking more about the economics of the forced sale to non-California loads of energy storage resources on these days, which are becoming more and more frequent in California. But Kathleen made a really good point about reliability, and it's really reliability in a couple different ways. So I didn't want you all to pigeonhole it into one different way. The first is that early sale of energy, and I think that's the one that you guys have been focused on. But the other one is then even in those once you make it to the very stressed hours, you then end up in a situation with where the West has already shown CAISO that the value of the energy is higher than $1,000, but CAISO is forcing the energy storage resources to bid at $1,000. And therefore, even in the most stressed hours, you're effectively forcing exports. And I don't think that operations would want that to be happening, especially if they're super stressed. And it really is solved just by allowing the energy storage resources to reflect this in their bids, and that just is if the bid cap goes up, then their bid cap goes up. I'll leave it at that. I think I've covered everything I wanted to at a high level. Thanks.
Thanks, Perry.
Thanks, Barry. Let's go ahead and go to Callie, please.
Hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. I actually had my hand raised to respond to, I think, Perry and Kathleen's conversations kind of towards the beginning, but my computer kept kicking me off. So maybe I should have taken that as a sign. But the topic I wanted to touch on, actually, I think Becky also touched on it when she weighed in here, and that's on whether or not this topic needs to first be in a catalog for us to proceed in a more expedited manner. So I'm happy to hear that it sounds like Becky and Juan, you guys are going to kind of take this offline and think through whether or not it needs to be in the catalog first, because I know you guys are trying to revamp that process. But just kind of my initial thoughts on that, and maybe you guys can take this into consideration when you are having those conversations, is, you know, this is a topic that's been brought up in a policy that has obviously already been on the roadmap because we're engaged in that right now. And a lot of times the CAISO does, you know, spin off certain topics when they see a little bit of a more urgency to it. So given that this has a sense of urgency, and I agree that it should be something that's, you know, top priority, just given the reliability concerns, especially as we're, you know, coming around the corner here and looking at summer of 2024. So I would like to see this not have to go through the catalog process first, because a lot of times if you go that route, a topic will sit in the catalog for quite some time before it actually gets picked up again. So I would encourage you guys, when you're having those conversations, to notice this as a topic that's been raised in an ongoing policy process already, and maybe think about spinning it off if you guys agree with the sense of urgency, so we can kind of get this one rolling. But just wanted to give my 2 cents there.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to step on. I'm having an audio delay, so for everyone that I have stepped on and likely will at the tail end of their comment, I apologize in advance. But no, Callie, that's well received, and yeah, Becky and I are definitely going to be taking that conversation offline. I think that was a little bit of a combination of the fact that we have this revamping of the catalog process, you know, 6 days from now. That stakeholder call is being held in just a week. But I think, yeah, we recognize the fact, and that's in essence why we're here in the working group to begin with, right? We are hearing very clearly the priority and the stakeholder sentiment of a need to address an issue. So I think that's why it did come up here in this working group process. I think the catalog comment was likely maybe kind of a combination of both, needing kind of seeing the spinoff. So let us get back to you guys on that. It was not meant to be to just put it in the catalog and let's let it sit. I think, in fact, that's why we're revamping it. So appreciate those comments. Wanted to give a little bit of kind of additional clarity into that, but we will be taking that conversation back and getting back to you guys. The other thing that I think we would like to do, because I'm hearing a lot on this conversation of several different past initiatives. So one of the things that I'd like to do is on our initiative page, and perhaps even kind of at a later session, kind of provide a little bit of material and a history context of this, so that we can kind of continue this conversation. So again, great conversation. Really appreciate y'all's engagement. We're definitely seeing the need for urgency and then also the issue to address. Let's go ahead and
sorry, Juan, can I respond real quick? I think I'm still off mute.
Yes, please.
Yeah, sorry. So just when you guys are having the conversations about how to move forward with the specific topic, again, I encourage you guys to consider, just given the sense of urgency, to spin it off. So it can start having those policy questions and having those in-depth questions specifically on this topic. So if we can reach a consensus, whatever changes might have to be made can be made before the summer.
No, I appreciate that comment, Callie. Definitely heard. Okay, let's go back to Chris. And then Perry, I see your hand up as well. Let's keep this conversation going, but I do want to make sure we get to our last problem statement. So, Chris, go ahead. Any new thoughts or kind of new iteration? We're all ears. We really appreciate this level of engagement, everybody.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, Chris Devon, Terrigen again. I'll try to keep it brief here, but I did want to kind of respond to some other thoughts here. First off, I would just support everything that Callie just said. Second that, I think this should be done quickly. I think this should be started up as soon as possible, frankly, as a implementation type of a change to kind of Perry's point on simply the way that the bid cap should be raised for storage during these tight conditions. And just to illustrate why I think, the examples here that have been provided already, the reports from the other tight periods in prior years, that's simply, something that should not happen in an efficient market outcome of using these kind of resources too early in the day. And the question is, these are resource adequacy resources. All of these storage resources are under RA contracts. They should be available during the peak hour. The CAISO's market, these bidding issues are simply causing this outcome to happen, and it really needs to be addressed. So I really, would encourage CAISO to try to do that piece of this sooner. And I wanted to respond to Doug and Alva, and just, I tend to disagree with their viewpoints here in the fact that, this is complex. I will agree with, but I think that the DEBs and the mitigation piece of this is a discussion that was really left unfinished previously in that energy storage enhancements initiative. I think there was an obvious agreement by the MSC and stakeholders in the CAISO that needs to be improved, and that was just a first starting point. So I certainly support those discussions, but that should not be a barrier to addressing this issue now for this summer. And there's ways that CAISO could try to address the impact of mitigation of storage resources over the summer during these periods, and they should be allowed to bid up to the 2,000 cap because of the opportunity costs of selling it, just like those exports can, just like those imports can. So, if we don't change that for this summer, then we're going to see another case of during these tight conditions when they get used too soon. During the day, operations doesn't want that. It's a reliability issue. Storage owners don't want that. It's an economic issue. So I do think that, this is extremely high priority, and so I appreciate what Becky said. I appreciate the feedback from others here in support of that. I just wanted to really hammer that point here again one last time, and just so for the sake of time, I'll stop at that. Thank you.
No, appreciate that, Chris, and appreciate everybody. This is the candid conversation we're looking for in these working groups. So, Sylvie, let's toss it back to you so that we can make sure we're covering all of our items here. And then, as we have noted, as part of this problem statement in this conversation, we have several items that we'll commit to taking back and coming back to this community with. So, Sylvie, floor is yours.
Great. I think we can move forward. It sounds like we've got some homework in terms of process to put together for you guys to follow through with that problem statement. Got one more on the table. This is really representative of things that we've heard from stakeholders during this process and previous processes. While I'm not usually a fan of a problem statement that proposes a solution in it, this isn't my problem statement, so I didn't want to over extrapolate on what stakeholders meant by this, but I'll put it out there and turn it over to you guys to fill in the blanks. But the ISO does not have a circuit breaker mechanism in the event scarcity pricing occurs over an extended period of time. And on the next slide, I provide a definition. Again, the ISO doesn't have a mechanism like this, so we don't have operational experience in it. However, I found a definition from PJM's stakeholder process on the topic. They note that a circuit breaker is an administrative mechanism intended to protect consumers and market participants from the financial impact of inactionable scarcity price signals. So we'd really like to get stakeholder feedback on what this means, when a circuit breaker mechanism would be appropriate, what their experience is in these situations to help divide.
Thanks, Sylvie. Absolutely, and we had several hands come up, and you know, one of them, I think you know who you are. I have to admit, I was gonna flirt with maybe calling you out rather to see if you would mind opining, but you raised your hand. I appreciate that. But there's 3 hands, so didn't identify who that was. Dan, why don't we start with you? Go ahead and unmute Dan and give us your thoughts.
Thanks, Juan. Dan Williams from the Energy Authority. So harkening back to what you said earlier about CAISO still kind of working on a post-op analysis of the kind of winter conditions up here in the Northwest and pricing and all that. I just want to make sure when we're looking at the circuit breaker and any of this that we kind of look at it comprehensively. I'm still kind of digging through some of the data, and of course, you know, we don't have perfect data on everything, but it appears that the energy component of LMP was pretty low during a lot of these conditions, but that the congestion component drove some very high prices for a very extended period of time during that winter event. So, you know, normally when we've been in sort of shortage scarcity conditions in the ISO during summer events, it's been you know, high offers that are driving high prices, not high congestion driving high prices. So just wanted to encourage some, you know, holistic looking into things as usual, and maybe considering some of the different types of conditions that can put us at the high scarcity prices at different times.
Okay. No, Dan, I appreciate that. So am I hearing you correctly that, you know, are you encouraging us to look at that data out of a perceived need to maybe have, I guess, maybe different variances of a circuit breaker mechanism depending on the situation that gets us into the scarce condition? I just want to make sure I'm understanding.
Yeah, and again, just kind of early digging into this stuff, and I'm not casting any blame here, but it's tough sometimes as a stakeholder to sift through data and draw the right causal links between things without having sort of all of the pieces of data that CAISO or DMM maybe have access to. So I don't want to be too far beyond the low beams that I have access to here. But I do feel like it's worth looking into this specific event where we had sort of extended periods of high pricing and what specifically was driving that high pricing. Because I don't think that it was the same scenario as maybe what we saw in September of 2023, July of 2022, some of those events.
Got it. Okay. Now, Dan, I appreciate that clarification there. And I think also, yeah, when we have that report out, we'll be sure to communicate that, broadcast that out, and we'll have some more data to take a look at. So I wanted to make sure I was understanding. I appreciate that back and forth. Let's go to Kathleen, please.
Great, thank you. This is Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. And I'm going to call you out, Juan. Am I the person you were looking for the hand to come up that you were going to call out?
Absolutely,
so. Okay.
Kathleen. Yeah.
I was too fast for you. So, yes, I raised my hand because I believe the CAISO pulled this from one of our comments. So happy to explain kind of what, at least in our mind, we were thinking and what it means to us. This suggestion to consider and talk about with this group, a circuit breaker or stop loss limit, is fundamentally tied to the discussions that James has been having in the last 2 meetings on what is the appropriate price to value scarcity on the demand curves. What do we want our scarcity design to do? We wanted to send the appropriate and rational price so that there can be some kind of behavioral response, or we can have confidence that the market is valuing the services as they are being provided during tight conditions appropriately. Yes, agree. The flip side of the scarcity debate is if the market begins to get to a point where it cannot correct the scarcity issue. It is not correcting the scarcity issue. It is a persistent issue. And at that point, we kind of actually move beyond we move beyond economics. We move to a place of the market where the market has stopped functioning correctly and cannot use its price signals, its LMP or clearing price, to drive behavior. That occurs when you have consistent scarcity over hours. So when we think about, so for example, what the stop loss or circuit breaker means to me is that over the course of a year, you want to send scarcity signals on a specific day. As a market, we do not want to believe that our market is triggering scarcity, let's say for 48 hours within a year. And I use the number 48 hours because in our example we provided to the CAISO, we said essentially what a circuit breaker does is says that over the course of a year, the net, let's say a net cost of new entry estimate, and a part of designing this type of market feature is to say, okay, what is the annualized recovery that, and the signal we want to send, and the reason other markets use net cone is because if you're having persistent scarcity over an entire year like that, you don't have enough resources. So you need to be sending a signal through your market that represents an incentive to go out and cure this deficiency. So some markets use net cone. So just working off of that as kind of a one option of the value, $96,000 per, let's say, megawatt year. If 2,000 is our highest scarcity price, you would have to have 48 hours of scarcity triggered in the CAISO market before that aggregate tracking of scarcity would hit 96,000 per megawatt year. But if just hypothetically, if your market failed and you had 48 hours of consistent scarcity across, let's say, 15 days, that's not something that the market can correct. And this is the tension and the trade-off of at what point is it now appropriate to have a stop loss kick in so that scarcity doesn't persist beyond a rational aggregate level, so that we have some assurance that loads are appropriately protected against that kind of inappropriate extended scarcity charges relative to this overall goal to improve our scarcity design. So I really see scarcity and stop loss mechanisms as the same coin, but it's just the heads and tails. If we were to increase it, like James went through that slide, you guys remember with the different curves, the different markets, and I think PJM, let's say, had 5,000. If we were to go down a path as a community where we said, okay, we might be comfortable with scarcity value representing $5,000 in a given hour, how many instances over a year would that be? Under a stop loss, generally speaking, it's 20 hours. So that's the trade-off and the policy discussion that we hope to have.
So I'm hearing a couple of different issues in there, and I want to pull some threads. One is this idea of looking over a length of time of persistent scarcity. So are we talking about here the idea that we want scarcity prices to give market participants enough time to react, but in the scenario that you're talking about, no one's reacting and we don't think anyone will react, and therefore there's a problem?
Yeah, stop loss mechanisms like PJM, which you pulled this from, so like has an entire stakeholder process to discuss this. ERCOT has a stop loss mechanism. They have the different prices. So it's when these things kick in, it's for things like Winter Storm Uri. The stop loss kicked in during Winter Storm Uri. It was an extended outage. It was a massive reliability issue. These are anomalous, but it is a protection that markets in other parts of the country put in place to protect
the buy side of the market from these types of occurrences. And when I say it's the flip side of the same coin, it's because you want scarcity to send the right signal, but you do not want scarcity to be a frequent occurrence, because that is an indicator of a market issue, right? That's the hook.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Kathleen. Sorry, I've been trying really hard to keep myself on mute, to not do that to y'all's ears. My apologies. Okay. No, thank you for sharing your thoughts on framing that up, Kathleen. So Callie, JK, Alva, we see you. And then if there are any reactions to that, I think this is a good conversation. Let's go ahead and go to Callie, please.
Yeah, hi, this is Callie Wells with WPTF. I actually raised my hand to kind of give my initial thoughts on what I envision a circuit breaker designed to look like. And actually, Kathleen hit on a lot of the things that I was thinking through, so I won't reiterate a lot of that. But I think if I were to bring it up at a really high level, when I think of a circuit breaker type design and any scarcity pricing mechanism, there's kind of two elements, and I think Kathleen was touching on these as well. And Sylvia, I think you picked up on that, is one of the elements is a magnitude, right? So how high do we actually want that scarcity price to be in any interval? And then a duration element. How long are we okay with sending that scarcity signal out at that magnitude? I like the way Kathleen phrased it as, if we get to a point where the market can no longer correct the scarcity, then in my mind, I go back to the intent of a scarcity signal, and that's really one of the intents, is to, incent additional supply to be made available to the market. Well, if we're in a position, those extended scarcity conditions, 48 hours, 2 days, 3 days in a row, and there is literally no additional supply that can be incented to be offered into the market, we're kind of at that point that doesn't make sense to continue to send out this high scarcity signal. So again, I agree with kind of Kathleen's perspective on what a circuit breaker design would look like and what that means in kind of the concept of scarcity pricing designs. So just kind of wanted to throw that out there. And then the second comment I just wanted to make, Sylvia, I appreciate your hesitation there on throwing in a solution to the problem statement. I think when you pulled up this PJM quote, it occurred to me that, and happy to provide some suggested rework of that problem statement, but almost capturing in that problem statement instead of the solution, kind of what is the issue that a circuit breaker cap design or any other potential solution is trying to address. So again, appreciate you kind of noting that you were hesitant to throw the term circuit breaker in the problem statement. So I think that's, we can provide some suggested rewording on that problem statement to really get at the issue that something like a circuit breaker is intended to address. So that was all I wanted to comment on. Thanks.
Thanks, Callie. Sylvia, any reaction there?
Thanks, Callie. And I think between you and Kathleen, I'm starting to get an idea of what the underlying problem statement should look like. I'm hearing inefficient or ineffective scarcity pricing being a problem during some scenarios or extreme conditions. So this is starting to shape up in my mind, but I'd like to hear what other stakeholders think if there's still reactions.
No, absolutely. Let's go ahead and go to JK, please.
Morning, JK Wong from PG&E. Hey, Sylvia, this is the best problem statement I like in this presentation. I think this is also the highlight of all the problem statements, because we've been talking about a magnitude of scarcity pricing in all the other problem statements, but here we come back to the timing issue. But with that speaking, I'd like to take one step back, because when we talk about a circuit breaker, it's really the pricing that happens to extend a period and want to back it to the normal level. But when we talk about a timing issue of a price signal, it can be more complicated than that. And being a math geek for one moment, I like to bring something to our attention, including instability of the pricing signal, like price could go up and down, bouncing very quickly, as well as the pricing going up, not stabilized. So those are all the timing issues. I'm so glad that circuit breaker is, coming into the picture, but also I'd like to, request that CAISO to consider the possibility of the other problems and not just limit the discussion to one price instability problem, but also considering the other issues while developing the scarcity pricing.
Interesting point. Thanks, JK.
All right, let's go to Alva.
I'm not going to, actually, I wanted to take this in a little different direction because of the way that this is written. I think it's quite interesting that PJM does not mention duration. It mentions the question of inactionable scarcity price signals. And I think the concept I was trying to bring up at the very beginning was that one function of scarcity pricing is essentially for CAISO to complete a market. It is an attempt to complete the current market, and it's an attempt to, in an anticipative way, complete future markets by bringing in supply that isn't currently represented in the market. And I think the inactionable here means there's an evaluation by the system operator that scarcity prices are not going to be able to complete the market. And so in some sense, the market is broken. And that is essentially the criterion in my mind for when a circuit breaker approach, or in other words, some way of acknowledging the market is broken and that we're going to take steps at a higher level to protect customers is happening. And it might be that normally you wait a while because the CAISO is a conservative entity and it doesn't want to declare the market broken until it's got a lot of evidence. But I don't think there needs to be a specific time frame that market participants are aware of, actually. I think it's really up to, because we're really talking about the equivalent of the out-of-market steps that are taken by CAISO now. They're trying to discover ways to complete the market. If they're not able to do it, then scarcity pricing, this PJM statement is just an acknowledgement that scarcity pricing is only going to provide rents to supply, and therefore should not be employed beyond some really minimal period. So I would push back a little bit against. I mean, I really appreciate the practical stuff that's been presented, and I know it's being used in other ISOs, but I think it isn't implied by this definition that you wait 36 hours and then finally decide that the market's broken. Thank you.
Thanks, Alva. As you were talking, I was reminded of something that Sybil said earlier, but I saw that she raised her hand. Incredible timing. Sybil, do you want to jump in?
Well, I don't know that I'm going to magically say whatever you were thinking from before, but
we're not mind melding.
just an observation that I think, there's a lot of evidence that this, through recent events that we've seen in other markets, that this sort of concept potentially has a lot of value. But also, I think, as you've heard in some of the sort of methodologies floated for how you may quantify some parameters that would drive how you may define a circuit breaker, those are linking this back to capacity. And in order for a circuit breaker function to be reasonable for all market participants, I think you have to recognize that it requires starting on a level playing field from a capacity perspective, and having faith and agreement from all market participants that you're planning to an adequate standard and meeting a like an equivalent reliability threshold. So while as I stated, I think, certainly this is an important concept and has the potential to protect consumers, particularly in, very extreme events that we may begin to experience with or greater frequency due to climate change, for example. It also, for it to be a reasonable market mechanism for a broader footprint without a shared capacity market across the entire footprint, capacity market or planning standard, I think you have to acknowledge that there's that upstream issue that has to be aligned first, which is having a shared reliability threshold for the entire market footprint. So I'm not sure how that fits in this. And again, I don't mean that comment as a reason to, downplay the value of this concept, just that if you have, different portions of the footprint who are not planning to the same threshold from a capacity perspective, then obviously you have different risk profiles that are being introduced, and therefore you could have inequities introduced here. So thanks.
Yeah, I think that was a nice way to frame up the logic of this concept in the regional market context. And our discussion, when we were discussing earlier that first problem statement, you had mentioned, that when we don't have perfect visibility into the imports and the energy actions being taken outside of the CAISO, an administrative mechanism like a price floor might be appropriate. Of course, something like that isn't perfectly efficient. So as we try and expand, price formation as something that is a reasonable market mechanism for all participants, there will be some error there, and I see the reasonableness of a circuit breaker in that context.
All right. Well, Sylvie, I am not seeing any other hands here. Last call. And again, we are going to be going into, we're going to be wrapping up this third sprint. It's the final of the 3 kind of sprint sessions like we had talked about. Would really like to understand not only the content that we've kind of gone over, but your reaction to just the cadence and the sprint concept for the work groups as well. Actually, before we move on to the next slide here, Sylvie, stay on if you don't mind. Great presentation. Thank you very much for your time. Let's go to Dan Williams one more time.
Just one more time, I promise, Dan from TEA. Just Sybil's kind of line of questions and thoughts there just kind of reminded me of something I wanted to bring out too. It's again kind of tangential, but when thinking about sort of what might happen if we were in a situation where there were persistent scarcity pricing for a number of hours or days, I think we also have to sort of bring in a conversation around CAISO's significant event CPM authority and the prices and effectiveness of that policy. But also the flip side of that is that's a tool that CAISO has that does not exist then in EIM and EDAM. So how do you kind of deal with setting some policies and protections around these type of events, but recognize that you would have an EDAM entity that if they're in the same condition, they would be pulling different levers to deal with a capacity shortage if it was a capacity shortage that was driving the scarcity prices versus say a energy-based shortage due to extremely high gas prices or unavailability of gas or something like that. So just put that in the bucket too of when we're looking at these. I think we have to look at some of the other levers that would be being pulled at the same time.
Yeah, no, Dan, great point. Thank you for bringing that up. Definitely looking to kind of understand again, yeah, that significant event CPM, that difference between what the ISO has, what each individual VA has in their tool set, and kind of reconciling those. So I appreciate that. Sylvia, any reactions there?
Not at the moment. It's a great point, and I'll bring it back to the team.
So, Chris, to answer your question, kind of where I was going as far as the comments, we're going to have those. We got a little bit of feedback here within the session on what to provide in that comment template. So give us a little bit of time to take that back. We'll get that published shortly. But we're looking for, it'll be at minimum 2 weeks, if not longer, for you to be able to take these comments and kind of provide your feedback on them. So if we could go ahead and move to the next slide, which is really just kind of a visualization for, visualization for kind of an open floor, right? I think we had some really good discussion. Our team definitely has a little bit of homework here for a couple of action items to kind of come back to this group with. So we will reflect that kind of inventory of issues. We will find a way to put that into our comment template. We'd really like to hear from the community there. We want to hear not only about, again, the content of the 3 sprints and your reactions to the problem statements that we've kind of discussed together here, but also we'd like to hear just how you felt that the sprint concept worked, right? We had taken a little bit of time in discussing scarcity pricing. And so I feel like we built a lot of momentum back up on the topic. Really appreciate that. Kathleen, why don't we go ahead and I see your hand. Let's go up there. And Chris, yep, absolutely. We won't wait too long. All right, Kathleen, floor is yours.
Thanks, Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. I'm going to show that I did not make the last meeting with this question, perhaps, but I thought we were also going to talk about strategic reliability reserves. Did you guys cover that in the last call?
No, Kathleen, we kind of brought that item up here earlier. I believe it was slide. It's okay. Hang on. Sylvia, do you recall what slide it was?
Yeah, I put it on that list of examples for the first problem statement when we were talking about things that price formation may not fully capture. I didn't offer any details around it besides putting it on that list. So if you would like to, we'll accept more comments on that.
Yeah. And Kathleen, when I mentioned that inventory, I think that's what we're looking for. We heard that that's by no means kind of an exhaustive list. And so if we get that together and then together kind of prioritize those, we can really kind of tackle the ones that the community feels are the most important. But this is open discussion, stakeholder feedback. So please go ahead.
I just wanted to make sure that it was, find out if there was any additional information you guys were planning to provide on the strategic reliability reserve. I had a bit of an interest to hear more from you on how you see them impacting, as this summer is the first time that we have had these types of resources, right, participating in our market. Operating Procedure 4420 got updated multiple times this past summer, which I appreciate all the keeping it fresh, but it was a lot to track. So updated multiple times to try to implement a bunch of things out of the CPUC, including RDR changes, I understand, and also the strategic reliability reserves. I would like to suggest it probably deserves, I believe it deserves a little more airtime from the CAISO and these working groups on how that went this past summer. And I recognize we have summer performance reports, so I'm not asking for a recap of operations, but I would like to have a stakeholder discussion on specifically like when strategic reliability reserves were told to remove their outages and they were performing in the market, what did you see as the impact on market prices and market outcomes, and do you have any concerns with them? like very targeted to the topic in the next steps of conversations about it.
Yeah, I think that's on my list of something that I would like to look more closely at. So I think that'll be a future item to get you more details on that and have a conversation around it. In my mind, made the list as a potential market action that could have downward pressure on prices. So I will refrain from being more precise at the moment until we have more details.
Thanks, Sylvie. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I think it's important to look into this as it's new to our market.
No, appreciate that, Kathleen. And again, you know, we will, just because this is the end of the sprint, right, does not mean it's the end of the discussion for scarcity pricing. I want to be clear about that. So we've had a lot of good conversation over the last 3 weeks. This was, again, just to kind of bring us back and bring the momentum of the conversation back up, because we had also had some very good conversation around BAA level MPM and fast start pricing. JK, I see your hand up. Let's go ahead and go to you.
JK Wang from PG&E. This question is either to Sylvia or Juan. I wonder if we have a plan going forward, whether it will be in the working group or in the policy development phase, to look at some analysis and data requests shared by the stakeholders about scarcity pricing, and maybe to the other topics as well.
I'm sorry, JK. Just want to make sure I understood your question. I kind of lost my audio there. That if we will kind of come back to an inventory of the requested analysis from stakeholders. Would you mind repeating your question? I apologize.
Yeah,
my technical difficulty.
Yeah, I think you capture it well. Is you know, because in the working groups, we actually either reflected in our comments, or stakeholders raised the request in the web meetings for some data and analysis. Some of those are pretty interesting. I think I will be also serve as a basis going forward. Does Kaizo envision this will be included in the working group phase, or will be more in the policy development phase? And if there's any timeline can share with us, that'll be very much appreciated.
No, thank you, JK. I apologize again. I think my AirPods are needing to go into their case here for just a moment. Yeah, I think it depends on the data request. So what I can commit to you is for us, we'll take that back and we'll be clear about those data requests, the feasibility of pulling that data request, the timelines may be associated with it. So some of them might be able to be posted onto the initiative page, and if that is the case, we'll go ahead and do so. But if with the timelines, they may end up in policy development. So JK, completely own that was a very squishy answer, but I think internally let us take that inventory of the requests, and depending on feasibility of pulling those, the complexity of pulling those, that might kind of answer that question. I don't think it'll be just a one size fits all. All of them will be before policy development. All of them will be within policy development. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. And another quick follow up. The Kaizo shared the schedule of the working group will end in February. Is that the plan? So after that will be policy development, or we're looking at more working groups coming up?
No, I think that tentative schedule, right, was to try to help out with planning. I think that that's kind of an active discussion right now. We've had some really good. I feel as a facilitator, we've coalesced and kind of crystallized around a couple problem statements have really crystallized. So stay tuned. But for right now, those are the two sessions that are planned. We're trying to strike that balance between, being able to act upon what we've heard, and then also, for example, I feel we heard a lot of things here today in kind of that out of market actions, or really the way that Sylvie verbalized it, or rather a stakeholder verbalized it, kind of rationality to price signals. We definitely heard quite a bit of stuff that needs to get taken back and requires some further discussion. So yeah, I wouldn't say the end of that schedule signifies a hard line. It's something that's kind of constantly assessed. I think it just kind of signaled more. We put that out in December, and we were looking out 2 months ahead. We'll get back to the whole community on what topics of discussion will kind of continue in the working group, and what topics go into policy development, and when policy development goes as soon as we can.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. And JK, also, that was kind of a squishy answer as well. So I will own that. But that's kind of the nature of the working group, right? It's very dynamic. And if we have a working group where we have complete alignment, every single person agrees on a problem and the issue, and the problem statement is refined, and we're ready to move forward. I don't think anyone is going to sit on their hands, so to speak, right? So stay tuned, guys, and really appreciate all of this really active engagement. I'm not seeing any other hands up. Last call for any kind of last thoughts here. Do we have any #2 phone only?
We do not.
Okay. Yeah, let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. And at this point, I want to thank Sylvie again for a great presentation. I want to thank all of you for joining us for these sprints. We are going to incorporate some of that feedback into our comment template. So if you could please provide your organization's official comments on the topics we've covered. And then JK, I think to your point, we will have an update in the upcoming sessions. We do need to continue the conversation on BA level NPM, that's scoping on fast start pricing analysis. And then obviously we have some action items just from this sprint, but also sprint 1 and 2 that we'll get back to the community on. So if we could go ahead and move to the next slide, please. And here I will hand this back to Brenda Corona to close us out. Brenda, the floor is yours. Brenda, I'm not sure if it's just me, but I'm not hearing you.
What? I'm sorry. Thank you. Sorry, Juan. I was triple muted on my headset. Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Sylvie. Thanks to our stakeholders who were able to contribute in today's call. Ryan, if you could let me go ahead and move the last slide so we can proceed on the next steps for this call. So for today's next steps, we do have upcoming meetings. We will be sending out a notice for that specific meetings. We do have something tentative planned for a workshop where Mike Calwater will be presenting on his notes from session 9. At this time, we'll get more details on that. And then also we are kind of moving and checking on our current situation with in-person hybrid meetings and also virtual. So at this time, this meeting was virtual. It's virtual, and this recording will be posted around 2 to 3 business days. So we'll get that out for everyone. And then on the next slide, Ryan, if you can, we do have the links to that stakeholder page. We have that slide presentation available, as well as the schedule that I just showed you right now. And then we are going to have those comments template available. So we'll send a targeted email just to make sure, if not even an additional notice, just to give everyone folks to know that that comment template is available to submit from this call. On the next slide, we will see an upcoming meeting for the annual policy initiatives roadmap process for 2024. Next week on the 30th, on Tuesday, please join me with Alyssa and Jillian. I'm Becky Robinson, who will be helping out, giving a lot of folks of the structure of the process, and we'll be going over some items that we're discussing today's call. We definitely want to make sure that's communicated. And I do see Margaret's comment, and I'll go back to that in 1 second. But for the annual roadmap, please be sure to pre-register. And so we'll have that recording also posted later that week for that meeting. So if you can make it, that would be great. We do have like a shortened comment window provided by Amelia, who told me, and so we want to make sure everyone is aware that that's out there, and our process is a little shorter than normal. So on the next slide, we do just have a news release of the FERC that accepts the ISO tariff changes for the Western day-ahead electricity market. This came out a few weeks ago, but we just want to keep everyone in the loop on this initiatives that are impacting day-ahead market enhancements and the extended day-ahead market. And then the last slide, we have just a blog on the energy matters. We just posted this on the 18th on the Great Transformation, Designing the Grid of the Future with our very own Mark Rothleader. He provides a lot of great information on his own experience as a Senior Vice President, Chief Operating Officer, and in terms of what he's doing in his role. And so definitely check that out if you can. But other than that, I want to go back and circle back with the comment deadline. We will be working on that internally. We'll get that back to you. I'll let Juan speak or Sivi speak on that if there is something I might have missed, but we do have that comment deadline that we will be giving folks enough time to submit comments this time around, because we are adding that a little bit later this week. Go ahead, Juan.
Okay, my turn to talk into mute. Sorry about that. Yes, no, absolutely. The comment deadline, you know, I heard two separate things here just within this session that we'd like to add to it. At least 2 weeks, Meg, at the very least 2 weeks, if not longer. We'll communicate that out with the notice for the comment template. But at the minimum, a 2-week comment deadline on this. We had a lot of discussion here today. This was broad, and we want to make sure that we provide ample time.
Thank you, Juan, for that input. And so I thank so much, everyone, for submitting questions and being very engaging. We're really appreciative of this ongoing for the price formation enhancements. Did I hear someone speak up in our panelists? But other than that, I think we are ready to close this call. We thank you so much. We'll give you everyone a heads up on the next upcoming meetings. We do want to give everyone time to submit comments, but thanks so much at this meeting. We'll be sending a recording later this week. Okay, Ryan, we're ready to close. Thanks so much. Thanks.
That concludes our conference. All attendees may now disconnect.